On March 22, 1933, the first experimental concentration camp, Dachau, was established in Germany. On its example, the Nazis began to work out the principles of organizing concentration camps, which gradually turned into state death factories with hundreds of branches in Germany and the occupied territories. The question arises how the Nazis managed to keep secret everything that happened in concentration camps, because for 12 years from 1933 to 1945 millions of people passed through them, and most of them were killed, died from hunger, diseases, and inhuman conditions. And the terrible truth was revealed only when Soviet, American, and British troops liberated the surviving prisoners. One explanation for this mystery is that the Nazis were able to cleverly and cynically deceive those who tried to find out what was really happening in Germany to political prisoners, and later to prisoners of war. For this purpose, several exemplary concentration camps were set up in Germany, as well as in Poland and the Czech Republic, where the Nazis took Red Cross representatives, journalists, and humanitarian missions. The world learned about the horrors that took place in German concentration camps, the terrible experiments on people, and the true scale of the destruction of prisoners only after the surrender of the Third Reich. To increase the efficiency of concentration camps, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler ordered the organization of brothels in 10 concentration camps. Applications to work in them were ostensibly voluntary. This system was part of an insidious strategy by which the SS deliberately humiliated prisoners. The subject of forced prostitution in concentration camps is hushed up in many countries to this day. They always came in the evenings. For 15 minutes at the most, they never stayed longer. Then it was the next person's turn. Margaret Nielsen was forced to remember these evenings for the rest of her life. The 25-year-old woman from Güstrow was already living in hell. It was 1943, and she was a prisoner in the Buchenwald concentration camp. Among tens of thousands of people, she was one of 16 women, number 13. In the SS concentration camp system, she and the other women had a special function. Her only job was to provide services to the men. Margaret Nielsen worked as a forced prostitute, not for the SS guards but for other prisoners. The idea to organize such brothels in concentration camps had come a year earlier to SS Chief Heinrich Himmler himself. It was not about doing something good for the exhausted, tortured prisoners. Himmler wanted to increase the productivity of his slaves, which was very low due to the poor living conditions in the camps. Therefore, in March 1942, he ordered, "I consider it necessary to assign diligently working female prisoners on a voluntary basis to brothels." From 1942, such brothels were organized in a total of 10 camps, such as Sachsenhausen, Mauthausen, Buchenwald, and even in Auschwitz. At first, the women were recruited from the women's concentration camp Ravensbrück, but later they began to be selected from other camps as well. They were mostly Germans. Jewish women were not selected for racial reasons. First, the SS personnel in charge of operating the brothels selected specialized women. That is, women who, prior to their arrest, had actually earned money through prostitution or were suspected of doing so. They were soon joined by women who, according to the Germans, were engaged in the desecration of the race, having relations with Polish, Russian, or Jewish prisoners sent to forced labor. Applications for this special service were voluntary in the sense that women were not forced. Those who volunteered could hope for adequate food, regular medical examinations, and protection from beatings, abuse, and hard physical labor. For a time, the SS also promised these women that they would be released from concentration camp confinement after 6 months. But true voluntariness under concentration camp conditions was, of course, out of the question, because the SS themselves had created an inhumane system from which the women were then protected. However, their participation saved their lives. According to historian Robert Summer, almost all women who went through the work of forced prostitution survived. Despite this, however, some of them still died in Nazi concentration camps. This topic was not addressed at the Nuremberg trials and was taboo in academic research until the 1990s, but was used in film in the 1970s. In addition, the presence of a brothel in Buchenwald was mentioned in Georgy Sviridov's 1960 novel Ringing Behind Barbed Wire. From each echelon, prisoners were selected for the Buchenwald brothel. Kampfführer Schubert was in charge of the selection. Each victim was carefully examined by doctors and then by the head of the Hygienic Institute himself, SS Major Gauvin. The supposed voluntary participation of women in camp brothels served as one of the reasons for the stigmatization of victims and the subsequent taboo of research into this phenomenon. When women consented, they were first quarantined and subjected to thorough medical examinations, especially for sexually transmitted diseases. During this time, they were well fed and nursed physically. After all, they had previously lived in horrible concentration camp conditions, which was reflected in their bodies. However, for the SS, the aesthetic aspect was not the most important. Women had to be healthy and able to work. Receiving the services of women for the pleasure of the SS was called a privilege. Historian Robert Sommer estimates that only 1% of concentration camp inmates had been to a brothel. These were prisoners belonging to the upper stratum of the concentration camp, usually working prisoners. For them, such a visit was supposed to be a bonus for good work. However, it cost 2 marks, which many prisoners had no way of obtaining. Mostly professional criminals went to the brothels. Political prisoners, with few exceptions, refused to go. The brothels in the concentration camps were part of an insidious strategy by which the SS deliberately humiliated prisoners, because increased worker productivity could be achieved by better nutrition for all prisoners. But that's not what Himmler wanted at all. When men went to the brothel, they were humiliating themselves in front of the SS men. At the same time, they also became complicit in the exploitation of women. But for the women, the situation was especially dire. They were victimized by the SS and the prisoners. Although, as Gregory Kogan's book shows, the topic of forced prostitution in concentration camps became known soon after the fall of the Third Reich, it was resolutely silenced. In many countries, it still occurs to this day. Only in early 1990 did some women, such as Margaret Nielsen, dare to speak out about their life in a concentration camp. Until then, no one was interested, neither the men who were served by the women nor the women themselves, because they were afraid that their plight might be presented as if they had literally volunteered to work in brothels. These women, by the way, are few in number. The victims were about a few hundred. But their fate is significant because it shows that the SS wanted to insult, humiliate, and abuse camp inmates in every conceivable way. In fact, for these women, it was all about survival, and at least in this they succeeded. Their plight was never recognized, nor were they compensated. There is only one